Hey, welcome back, Levelin Up Nation. It is your host, Brigham Blackham. I am so excited today. We have Rich
So
Hopkins.
when I started competing, it was a whole bunch of time investment. It was hours and hours and practicing at club after club, writing and rewriting 25, 50. Some of the other people I know, they're writing 100 different versions of their speech.
I think defining your voices that you listen to and making sure that you're discerning, is this the person that I want to listen to? And is their feedback something that I know will help? Sometimes we don't even know if it will help if we don't have the experience.
Whole life is nothing but a series of story after story after story, not just information after information after information, unless you spend your entire life doom scrolling.
Hey, welcome back, Levelin Up Nation. It is your host, Brigham Blackham. I am so excited today. We have Rich Hopkins. He is a world-class speaker, someone that really knows this idea of how to win anyway. We're going to explore some of the concepts that he has really started to live in his life over the last while and share some stories, be able to talk how we can really take your life, your business, your communication to that next level. Rich, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Hey, Brigham, I'm doing great. Early morning. What a better way to start the day.
Absolutely. Well, let's first dive straight in here. I know your story comes a lot in handy when you're talking about like this competition of speaking. You had an awesome run with Toastmasters. Would you mind sharing a little bit of your experience actually competing at the highest level in Toastmasters?
Sure. Well, winning anyway kind of derived from several things in my life, but it's a concept that when I came up with it, I realized I'd been living it before I came up with the concept. And one of the reasons is exactly what you say, the Toastmasters International Speech Competition, because it's an opportunity to win a world championship of public speaking. And who doesn't want to win a world championship, right?
Right.
So I got fairly fortunate in 2006 and managed to go all the way up to the final stage and take third. And a couple of years later, in 2008, I went all the way up again, but I didn't place. The interesting thing with that year was they were making a documentary about the World Championship, kind of as a silver thread for their movie on the fear of public speaking. So I'm all excited. I'm thinking it's been 2 years. I took third. I can win this thing. They're going to make a movie about me winning the World Championship. What I got was a movie about me not winning the World Championship. And that's kind of where I had to figure out how to win anyway, how to turn that from being a devastating loss, which it in many ways was. There were a lot of things going on in my life that were kind of counting on doing well in that contest, to being able to adapt to where I was now and how I was going to be able to leverage that and embrace it for what it was.
Wonderful. You know, when I hear that we all have these losses at times, it's how we respond to those seeming failures in our life that really dictate whether or not we are happy, whether or not we are fulfilled. I would love to hear, what are some of the things you've been able to do because of not winning? Because sometimes winning, you have a specific trajectory. This is now things that happen that lined up, but not winning at that competition. What are some of the opportunities that came from that?
Well, I wouldn't say opportunities came up from not winning as much as opportunities came up from how people viewed me when I didn't win. Because they had this movie a couple of years later, it finally came out, and people were seeing it all over the world in Toastmasters, watching me in my journey, because the directors made me and the winner, Lashenda Rundles, basically the top two characters featured time-wise, and kind of ran our storylines against each other, where she was, the good guy and I was the bad guy, sort of. But it worked out that people saw the way I dealt with things, online. I've got a big online presence on Facebook and LinkedIn, I had a blog at the time as well. So people were aware of who I was, and so they were watching me in real life and watching me in this movie. They were appreciative of the way I was able to adapt and deal with it, because it was initially not necessarily handled well, but then I was able to move beyond it. And they invited me to their district conferences. A lot of them showed the movie, and I did Q&A after the movie. Heck, I even got flown to Hawaii. Nice free trip to Hawaii to show the movie and do a Q&A. It was really an opportunity that I didn't expect, didn't want it to be the way that it was.
Mm-hmm.
But if the movie hadn't existed, I don't know how much of a boost I would have gotten from that situation. So it was kind of a perfect storm for me.
That's wonderful. I mean, flying to Hawaii, that sounds pretty amazing, being able to go and experience that. I've only been to Hawaii once, but man, it was awesome. One of the things that I really wanted to dive into was, you've not just competed once in the world stage, you've actually done it twice. I would love to figure out, what does that preparation look like for you? What are some of the ways that you've been able to make sure that you hone your story, own the stage, and no matter what other people are doing, you are 100% confident that you're going to do your very best?
Well, preparation changes over time for me. I've been competing for 25 years. So when I started competing, it was a whole bunch of time investment. It was hours and hours and practicing at club after club, writing and rewriting 25, 50. Some of the other people I know, they're writing 100 different versions of their speech.
Wow.
And so I've always been kind of in the middle in terms of, do I practice as much as other people, or do I practice more than other people? The key for me is I practice as much as I need.
Right.
For me. But when you're going that far, because I've won district, which is basically a January to May journey, in this contest 9 times.
Wow.
And then I've been to the semifinal level, which early in the day was the region level. I've made it that far. I think it's 7 times, or no, 6 times. I don't know. I can't even remember anymore. It's been a long time, because they keep changing all the rules. But that would take me through June, and then the World Championship takes you through August. So it's like almost your entire year when you're going that far. So the time investment is huge. And that doesn't even involve the other contests that I would do, because many years I'd be doing international and evaluation and table topics, humorous, tall tales. So I devoted a lot of time and a lot of practice. And when you do that, you can't help but get better.
Yeah.
Because that's really the goal. I mean, yeah, there's a goal to win, but if you don't have a sub goal of getting better, not only will you not win, but you will not benefit from competing as much as you should.
That's beautiful. You get better every single time you are on stage, and you are consistently looking for ways to improve. You know, it's one thing that you could do to just stand on stage and deliver the same rote presentation every single time. It's another to say, how can I make this just a little better than I did last time? How can I make this clearer? How can I make this portion more significant, or tie into my audience and make sure that they understand why I'm saying this? You know, there was a few really great questions that I heard from a previous podcast guest that he did in preparation. I wanted to get your thoughts on it, if this is something that you could use, or if you have a similar idea. He said, I really only want 2 bits of feedback. Number one is, what message did you get from what I was communicating? And the second one was, what are you going to do because of it? What are some of the ways that you've been able to get feedback that's actionable and helpful? That's how he did it. I'd love your take.
Right. Well, and that's for him. You're probably talking about Alexandre, right?
I was actually talking about, who was it? It was Mott was his last name.
Yeah, Alexandre.
Yeah, Alexandre Mott. Yep, that's right.
Yeah, no, he's awesome, and he's got this thing down to a science. I'm a lot messier than Alexandre. I take it all in, and I use that as a way to train my discernment, because you get a lot of bad advice. A
Yes.
lot of people have no clue what they're talking about, because, I mean, Toastmasters is a wonderful organization. Like I say, 25 years, but it's beginners helping other beginners. And then as they go through, they get more and more experience. But even some of the most experienced members have only done so much when it comes to speaking, contest speaking, professional level speaking.
Yeah.
And so you're going to get a lot of experience from them, but is it going to be the right experience for what you are trying to accomplish? And that goes for, are you doing a contest? Are you doing a TEDx? Are you speaking at a business conference? Whatever it is. So you need to learn discernment and understand that they are coming from a good place, but it isn't necessarily the place that you're going to be. So their feedback may or may not work. So I take it all in and I cross it off, or I accept it, play with it, practice it, keep it, lose it, based on my own experience and what I'm willing to own on stage.
Beautiful. I think defining your voices that you listen to and making sure that you're discerning, is this the person that I want to listen to? And is their feedback something that I know will help? Sometimes we don't even know if it will help if we don't have the experience. But as you said, like, you're going and filtering this feedback through your own experience, through all the different things that you've seen, heard, like, well, that's something I can use. That's useful. And if something doesn't work for you, you're like, thank you for sharing, and don't worry about applying that.
Right.
I think that's a great point. One of the other things I would love to hear about how you own the stage is, what have you done to be able to level up your speaking so that on any stage, whether it's one-on-one, one-to-many, or one to an entire crowd, that you've been able to really take it to that professional level in speaking? What does that process look like? Sure, maybe a story or so. Would love to hear what that professional level speaking looks like for you in your journey doing that.
Sure. You know, a lot of people think about owning the stage and they consider it a physical presence. I'm big and I'm moving around and, look at me. Well, for me, I grew up with a disability. And by the time I started getting on big stages in Toastmasters, that disability had put me in a position to, let's say, upgrade my lower left leg. So moving around on stage is still rather difficult for me. And even the past couple of years at the district level, I've been either standing unable to move, or last year I competed in a wheelchair. Now, Toastmasters has had people, well, two that I can remember, who've won the world championship from a wheelchair. Yeah. So you can still own the stage without necessarily having this amazing physical presence if you have an amazing emotional, mental presence. If you are in touch with the audience, in tune through a conversational style. A lot of times you get people who own the stage because they're marching all over and doing all the business, but you're watching them perform, and that can win over the judges. But if you don't have that, you better be able to get into their hearts, get into their minds. Of course, if you can do both, all the better.
That's a great way to think about filling the stage, not just with blocking to and from. It's actually making sure that you are connecting with the emotional quality of your story and making sure the audience feels it. I think that was a beautiful way to answer that question. One of the other things I would love to hear is, what are some of the challenges that you've experienced as a professional speaker that, if you had known those things early on, you could have prepared more effectively? What are some of the things you've been able to learn through your own experience as a professional speaker?
You know, there are things that happen when you're doing a TEDx or you're out in front of a company that you know could happen, but you assume they won't happen. And then they happen anyway. The slides don't work, even though 10 minutes before the slides work just fine. The sound breaks out, even though half an hour before the sound check, it worked just fine. So you can go in even knowing all the different things that could go wrong. Murphy's Law is everywhere. But even if you're totally prepared, even if you have all contingencies covered, something could blow up anyway.
Yeah.
And then you have to completely rely on how well you know your speech, how comfortable you are on that stage. And sometimes you have to be willing to punt a little bit, to pause your speech, to get a new battery, to alter what you're doing with the slides and just say, hey, we're not going to do the slides. We're just going to talk. Because your audience sees what's going wrong. And if they see that it's bothering you, they start to lose their connection and they start to wonder just how credible you actually are if you can't handle a glitch here or a glitch there. And that's just on stage. Let's not even talk about getting lost before you go there or your luggage not showing up.
Sounds like there's a story there. Well, Rich, one of the things that I'm constantly looking for in mentors, in professional speakers, is what are they doing to not only find more stages, but to be able to get in front of the right people so they can serve them with their message. What are you doing right now to make sure your message lands with your audience and have the right people in the audience?
Well, for me right now, my right audience are people who want to become speakers. I'm doing less speaking at the moment than I am coaching. But for whatever side you're looking at, speaking or coaching, it's the same process. Identifying who you most want to work with, who you most want to speak to, who are you most qualified to work with, who are you most qualified to speak to. You're in real estate, that's your process. Who do you want to work with? What level of homes do you want to sell and buy? You create this target. Well, a speaker does the same thing. We have a target of companies, of associations that we want to go after. Doesn't mean we won't take, the smaller house that we might have to work a little bit harder on because, hey, we do need to pay the bills every month. But we need to stay focused on who we want to be, where we want to go. That's number one. But number two is even more important. And this, you got to do outreach.
Yeah.
You've got to not just post something on Facebook, but send an email, make a phone call, go visit. And it's like, what, go visit as a speaker? Yeah. You want to go speak at an association? Try visiting the association first so you can get to know the people there. Meet the person who might bring you in person and build a relationship. You're going to have a better shot at getting in. Go to a conference you want to speak at next year, this year. So you have a lay of the land of what they want, what they expect, and what it will be like for you. Now, that takes time and it can take money, but isn't that what you need to do in anything in the long run, is spend some time, invest some money, because it's all sales. The more you understand who you're selling to, the more you'll be able to give them what they're willing to buy from you.
That's beautiful. As soon as we understand who it is that we're talking to and how we serve them, it changes the way you interact with them. My mentor, Greg Kimball, he talks about this idea of if you don't know what they want, you're just trying to sell them something. As soon as you understand this is what they want, what they're trying to do, what their progress looks like, then you can say, well, if this is actually what you want, this is how you're progressing, and I have something that will help you, let's have a conversation about it. Then you're no longer selling. All you're doing is serving. And I think that's a key distinction as a speaker, is to focus on service. I know you have a handful of products that you connect people with, a handful of different keynotes. When you are connecting with a event coordinator, What do you do to make sure that you have enough information to say, I think this is the right fit for that organization?
A lot of ways to get that. Obviously, the one-on-one communication with that meeting organizer is primary.
Mm-hmm.
So, you finally get past the email stage, you get on the phone. But after that, how are you interfacing with the audience you're going to have? Mm-hmm. Do you have an opportunity to send a questionnaire to the meeting organizer or to some of the people who might be in your audience that can share with you perhaps some of the issues they're facing that might be related to what you talk about, so that you can customize what you're doing in that next presentation? Maybe if you're not doing a questionnaire, you can actually have a 10, 15-minute talk with people who are in that company.
Yeah.
So the closer you can get to the people you'll be speaking to, the better presentation you'll be able to prepare.
Ooh, bars. That was so good. The closer you get to the people you're speaking to, the better your customization will be, the easier it is for them to actually resonate with your message. That's so good. That comes from experience for sure. Well, Rich, I have another quick question for you. When you think about some of the common mistakes that professional speakers make, that you're like, wow, if you just didn't do that, you'd get invited back. What are some of those things that you can let other speakers know? Hey, avoid X, Y, or Z so that you can make sure that you stay in good graces with the event coordinators.
Don't go over time.
Mm.
That's huge. People don't think about that. They just talk, and sometimes, but don't go under time either. I mean, you can go under time by 5 minutes, but if you're going under time by 15 minutes, then the meeting planner's kind of wondering, well, did you just not have as much to say as you thought you did? And we're paying you the same amount? So, hold the time standards. But more importantly, it's less what you shouldn't do on stage and more what you should do. You should be the easiest person to work with. You should be somebody that they are able to be in communication with. You get back to them quickly. When you show up, you meet the people in the audience there. You don't just show up to speak and leave. You show up early and you stay late, if at all possible. And it usually is possible if you're intentional about your scheduling. You want to get to know the people who are handling your audiovisual, because lots of things go wrong, but they're more likely to go wrong if you just assume that everything's going to be fine and take them for granted.
Yeah.
Don't take them for granted. Heck, bring them a gift. Bring them something, give them one of your stress balls at the very least, just to let them know that you recognize them, you honor them, and need them. And they're going to be much more likely to go the extra mile for them. And one more thing, just going back the other way of what not to do, be real careful with your humor. I'm big on humor. Heck, I've written books on humor. Go Ahead and Laugh. Go Ahead and Laugh Volume 2. Both available on Amazon. Free plug. Okay, humor is incredibly important, because the moment after they laugh is a moment they are most connected with you, most ready to learn, unless you've used your humor to hurt someone. You've used their humor to attack their competition. You've used your humor to make even their CEO look bad. Believe it or not, there are speakers that think, oh, I can get in the audience's good graces by making a little fun of the top staff, the top brass. Well, guess who's paying you ultimately? So you want to get invited back? You make sure your humor is on point and appropriate, or not only will you not get invited back there, there could be repercussions from everyone that meeting planner and that company interacts with if they ever ask them about you as a speaker.
That's really great advice. Making sure that you run by some of the humor with other people before you get on stage in front of everybody, to make sure it's on point, it's above bar, and it's honestly, I think sometimes you'll hear one crass joke and it changes the entire energy of the room.
Absolutely.
Like, ooh, that might have lost all of your rapport for the first 40 minutes of your speech because you shared one joke that was off kilter.
Bonus point, if I can fit this in,
Go
on
ahead.
those questionnaires, when you're talking to people, find out what a taboo subject is.
Mm.
You know, there's a very famous story about a speaker going up and telling a joke about the airline industry and issues they were having, and he had not researched to realize that their CEO had died in a plane crash 6 months prior. You got to know these things.
Yeah, that's a I'm not going to get invited back type of joke for sure.
Definitely.
So you have a questionnaire that you typically will send out. You interact with the audience before you get out on stage. One of the things I've heard from multiple speakers is actually deliver your speech to maybe one participant that you met at that time, or you had a really great connection with, and you kind of make them the example. You go through them. What's your take on finding that type of intimacy as a speaker?
You mean delivering it to them, so finding them in the audience and using them as kind of your
go-to. If you have a story, you say, oh, you know what, I'm going to share this as if it's just sharing it to that one person. And then it brings all the audience to feel through that person. What's your thoughts on that?
I can see that as an emotional touch point. For me, I would rather find several people like that versus just one, especially if it's a bigger audience, because I don't want to be focused over here, even subconsciously, when I need to be focused on the entire audience.
Right.
I mean, you're not scanning your audience. You're always talking to this part of the room or this part of the room. And if you can find a friendly face, that's great, because they don't know you're looking at one person. They assume you're looking at them if they're behind them or in front of them. So you get segments, even though you are looking at one person. So I think the concept is sound, but I would expand it based on the venue, the audience, and just your own comfort level. Not to mention the fact that one person might get a little weirded out.
Sure.
You're constantly looking at them.
I think that's a good point. You want to make sure that you're balancing all different elements of the room. One thing that I did as an actor was you typically have 6 main sections. You have the first 3, you have audience left, the audience center, and audience right. There's 3 different places. And then you also have higher, same thing, but back of the house. If you have a mezzanine, you may even have 9 places where you get to place focus.
Right.
So it depends on the environment. I've also done theater in the round where you are playing on the angles so that you can play to this half of the audience, or when you're turning around, you're playing to the back half of the audience. And always checking with your space. What does that look like? How do I make sure that I'm not only playing to a small section? I think that's a key distinction there.
Absolutely.
One of the things that I think is interesting is all of us have a story, and owning your experiences, owning your message is about finding those connections and then delivering them honestly with a lot of emphasis on making sure that it's genuine. What are some of the ways that you deliver content, but not only content? I know sometimes people are like, well, I have to get this, and they forget to fit in their own story, their own experience with it. What are ways that you've avoided just being an information dump?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest challenges I have with clients, because people feel like information is credibility. The more information I give you, the smarter you'll think I am, the more you'll like me, the more I can charge, etc. I've never been that type of speaker. I've always come from a storytelling mode. I mean, look at my shelves. It's comic books. It's Star Trek. Nice. I am huge when it comes to stories, and that is where my storytelling has grown out of, is understanding how to hold a narrative, how to use dialogue when you speak. And so when you have information, that's wonderful. You should have information. People are paying you for it. But if you have too much information, they're not going to retain it. If you aren't anchoring that information in a story, if you aren't making a point in a story, that information is going to go, whew, we already have enough problems as speakers of being forgotten by lunch
Yeah.
or by next week. People remember stories much longer than they remember information. And so if the information and the point is embedded in the story, just like teaching man to fish versus giving him a fish. It's a 12-word story, but we totally get the concept that is attached to it. You have to do that in your speaking, stories with dialogue, humor, a twist. And that's what I work with my coachees on, is helping them use those stories, develop them. And they're everywhere. Your whole life is nothing but a series of story after story after story, not just information after information after information, unless you spend your entire life doom scrolling.
Yeah. Yeah, I probably don't want to continue doom scrolling all the time. I love that you said every element of your life, every experience you have, that's a story. And in the right circumstance, you can take those stories, package it in such a way that it ties in and teaches or brings out a concept. And they'll remember that concept, not because you just said the concept, but because it's attached or anchored to a story. So profound. What are some of the ways that you've been able to take your stories and really narrow down and figure out, this is the point that I want to make sure people are getting out of this? Because a lot of times you have stories that could go 12 different ways. And in certain circumstances, you might have 2 or 3 different points. What is the way that you really make sure that your story gets narrowed down to one concept or one point that you want your audience to take away?
I don't. I have stories that'll have 2 or 3 ways I can go, like you just said. What determines the point I use is the audience that I have. Because they, okay, I have a bike story where I crashed my bike and I was 9 years old, going down a big hill, crashed at the bottom of it, went over the handlebars into rose bushes. And the biggest issue, the climax of that is I'm knocked unconscious. People stop, wake me up. The first thing out of my mouth is, where's my candy? Because I've been coming back from 7-Eleven, had my candy wrapped around the handlebars. Now, that story could be about being a stupid kid, not wearing a helmet because it was 1977. So there's that option. There's what's important to you. There's just having that mindset of a child where you're managing to not worry about the pain because you're wanting to be focused on something else. There are a lot of different directions and then there's, are you willing to help somebody? Would you help somebody? Would you stop your car these days? Or would you just let that person sit and rest? Well, depending on my audience, those points are going to have different significances. And so I'm going to use the story in a different way. So I will tell different parts of the story to different levels with different intensities. Maybe the crash is incidental to my entire motivation for having the crash, which was to go down the hill as fast as possible so that I could get up the other side of the hill with enough momentum on my bike. That's an entirely different aspect of that story.
I think that's a really great point, because as you have a very fleshed out story, you look at the context that you're sharing that story in, and that will determine whether or not the point is going to land. You say, oh, this is actually the main point to this story. I do think that if you have too many points to your story and you don't choose one and say, hey, for this audience, this is what I want to make sure I highlight.
Exactly.
People might not actually understand why you're sharing the story. This is something that I've noticed with young storytellers. They tend to ramble and ramble and ramble, and they share all these different ideas. And you say, why are you sharing this with me? As soon as you help them understand, well, this is the connection that I see, then you allow your audience to say, oh, I can connect those dots. That makes sense. I have a friend, he says, story point solution. His name's Woody Woodward, great speaker. And I think any story has a point, and every point has a story. And that doesn't mean a story can only have one point, to your point. So when you think of one of the things that has transformed the way that you tell stories, I would love to get your top tip or your top suggestion for newer storytellers to take their story to that next level and to really own the stage. What does that look like for you?
Well, for me, the transformative moment in terms of storytelling is when you're telling that story for the audience instead of for yourself.
Yeah.
Too many speakers climbed Mount Everest or went to space or whatever, and they get booked because they're celebrities, but you go and you watch them and it's all about them and their story. And maybe they tack on something about, so you shouldn't give up at the very end, as opposed to telling your story in a way that involves the audience, brings them along with you, helps them into your mindset every step of the way, asking them questions. What would you have felt if you were, stuck on the side of a mountain, not sure if you could go up or down? At least make me think about it instead of only hearing about what you thought about. But the story for me that is probably the most significant in terms of teaching me to do that was when I did have to upgrade my leg. 36 years old, I spent my life limping with an atrophied left leg, and the ankle finally stopped working. So I stopped walking, and I had to make a decision. It's like, do I want to spend my life in a wheelchair? Do I want to be constantly on a walker using crutches? Or am I still young enough to voluntarily become an amputee because I didn't have to and move on with my life from there? And when I tell that story, I get into the audience's head and I ask them, what would they have done? How would they have felt to be in a position to give up something they'd worked their entire life to keep? And then depending on the audience, I move it towards, are you holding on to something simply because you don't want to let it go? Because you're too invested in it, whether it's a department in your company, an employee you should have fired a year ago, a relationship you should have stopped 6 months ago. Are you able to then let go and embrace the next level? And it becomes a longer story because it's an arc of loss and then redemption. Are you able to lose something so you can have something better? And it becomes something that, yes, I went through, but they can all experience.
Beautiful. When you think about taking that story and expanding upon that, every single time you share it, I bet there's some little elements that you're like, this is the way that my audience needs to hear that. You talked about your new foot smell or your new leg smell. I love that idea. Like, it was in your TED Talk, if I remember right.
Yes.
It just made me laugh really hard. What is it about that new foot smell that you're like, man, that brings out, because that was the thing that I remember from your whole TED Talk. I was like, that anchored that moment that made me laugh. It was also made me think a lot. How have you crafted moments like that really impact your audience in such a deep, profound way?
And right there, you nailed it. It made you laugh.
Yeah.
Because you laughed, you remembered it. Mm-hmm. And the whole reason the new foot smell became part of my speech, that appeared in my 2008 World Championship speech, almost a decade before my TEDx speech.
Wow.
And it was created because an amputation story is depressing.
Yeah.
It's stressful. The audience comes down. Mm-hmm. And so you have to pop that balloon. And that's one of the biggest reasons to use humor, is to be able to create the rhythm, the up and down roller coaster in your speech, bring them back up, and give them that relief that you're okay, they're okay. It's okay. I cut off my leg. All right. There's nothing like that new foot smell, which of course then ties into the new car smell and that whole bit. It touches something that they're already familiar with, but makes them think about it in a different way, which is a key to how to use humor. And then you can blast off into all the benefits of the new foot smell, being able to play catch with your kids, being able to walk around Costco without feeling pain, except in your wallet. All sorts of new things that you're able to continue to do or do for the first time because you finally let go and discovered your own version of that new foot smell, whatever it might be.
That's beautiful. I think that's what every great speech needs, is a new foot smell, some type of anchoring moment. Could be a laugh, probably most likely should be a laugh, but something that leaves your audience with something to connect with, to resonate with, to anchor. And no better way to do that than humor. I love great stories. And thank you so much, Rich, for sharing such rich examples of how to be a better storyteller, how to win anyway. I think that's a very profound and simple idea. And I'm glad that we had this conversation today. Is there any question that I didn't ask you that you're like, man, I really wanted to make sure we covered this before we ended? Anything that you'd like to add at the end?
Well, you've covered a lot. And I think what I really want to do is just tie in. It's like, okay, so yeah, the new foot smell is the punchline, but the concept of letting go of something and finding the silver lining once you do, that's where Win Anyway comes in. Because you get to decide for yourself whether you're winning or losing. The world may say, what do you mean you're winning? You cut off your leg. What do you mean you're winning? You didn't win the world championship. Well, okay, you can tell me that I'm not a winner, but why do I have to accept your definition? My goal was to do as well as I could. And no, I didn't win the world championship, but I can still compete if I want to, or I can change my goal altogether and go do a TEDx. I can decide. I can celebrate what I have accomplished. I can re-strategize what I want to do next, and then I can keep going. If I take responsibility for it, if I bring that ownership back inside of me, instead of relying on the world to tell me I'm valuable, that I'm winning, I define whether or not I'm going to win anyway.
Beautiful. And with that wonderful word of wisdom, I appreciate you, Rich. Thank you so much for being here, leveling up our mindset, skill set, and tool set on how to be a better speaker. Guys, Rich has a wonderful website. It was richhopkins.com, correct?
Correct.
That's where you can go find more from him. Like and subscribe. Give us a shout on social media. Would love to stay connected. If there's anything that you can do with your life to make it a little bit better and level it up, I encourage you to take that action and go win anyway. You define the terms of what winning looks like. And I hope that you have a great rest of your day. We'll see you next time.